I journeyed on Good Friday in my van down some rather narrow and winding Norfolk lanes in order to take you on a tour of this hidden gem of a church. I was praying all the while that another vehicle wouldn't come in the opposite direction. Thankfully it didn't, and I arrived at my destination, St Faith's, Little Witchingham, in one piece. St Faith's is in a remote spot but in a glorious setting, in a churchyard where the sparse headstones of the dead are set among a profusion of living flora and fauna, and on my visit the churchyard was covered in a carpet of primroses and the birds were singing. It was quite delightful. It is a miracle that this church has survived, as there is no real settlement here at all, just an isolated farm and a row of cottages, and it's been like that for many centuries. In truth, this church, built in the early years of the 14th century when this part of Norfolk was much more heavily populated than it is now, has long been surplus to requirements. It has, at various points in its history, been semi-derelict, and each time has been pulled back from the brink. In the 18th century, the condition of the church was so bad that the whole building had to be given a new roof. 100 years later, in the 19th century, all the windows had to be replaced when the same situation arose again. By 1945, the few parishioners had given up on the place. The church was declared redundant, and there was a plan to take it to pieces and stone by stone move it to Borderswell, where the church there had been destroyed in a plane crash during the Second World War. That plan was shelved, considered impractical, and instead in 1950 this building was scheduled for demolition. Thankfully, they didn't get round to flattening it, and St Faith's was simply locked up and left to decay. By the late 1960s, St Faith's looked like this. The roof had gigantic holes in it, water was pouring in, the floor tiles had all been stolen, the furnishings and glass had all gone, and the building was being gradually smothered by thick ivy. But in 1967, the fate of this simple building would change, all thanks to the endeavour of one woman, Eve Baker. Eve was an artist and a renowned specialist in the conservation of wall paintings, and she decided to climb through one of the broken windows and have a look inside. She'd had a tip-off that there might be treasures to be seen within. She noticed that large areas of the plaster were coming away from the wall, and underneath that plaster were patches of colour with the unmistakable patina of medieval wall paintings. Eve was just in the nick of time. Due to the terrible condition of the fabric, the wall paintings were already flaking away, and it is certain that within 5 to 10 years, had the church continued on this bleak trajectory, they would be lost. Thankfully, after this tantalising discovery, the church roof was swiftly repaired and retiled, new glass was put in the windows, and new rainwater goods put in place, and the church gradually dried out. Between 1970 and 1975, the wall paintings were conserved by Eve Baker and her assistants, and what they uncovered would prove to be one of the most important and rewarding medieval painting schemes to survive in England. So let's step through the door of St Faith's at Little Witchingham and go inside and have a look at these remarkable wall paintings. The whole of the north wall of the nave, which is windowless, is covered in a complex decorative scheme. On this wall there are 3 levels to the paintings. The topmost level, which is the most damaged and faded by water ingress, once had large standing figures of the 12 apostles surrounding an image of Christ. These are really quite indistinct now. At the far left-hand side of this upper tier was a large image of St Christopher. He is where you would expect him to be, directly opposite the main door, it being the medieval belief that those who saw an image of St Christopher wouldn't die suddenly that day. Then below these large figures is a series of rectangular panels along the whole length of the wall that tell a story. Although some of these are damaged, it is possible to work out what the narrative is. It is the Passion of Christ. Such a series of images would in later centuries develop into what are known as the Stations of the Cross, but in the 14th century that formal imagery had not developed. Some of these panels have nearly been entirely obliterated, but others, though faded, are still indistinct. Among the more obvious, working from left to right, is the whipping, the flagellation of Christ, with beside that Christ before the high priest Caiaphas. You can tell Caiaphas is a high priest because he's wearing a bishop's mitre. Further along is the deposition of Christ from the cross, with beside it, much less distinct, the burial of Christ in the new tomb. Further along again, the Passion gives way to the resurrection. We see an image of the harrowing of hell, with Christ letting out the souls of Adam and Eve and all humanity from the gaping mouth of Hades. There is, beside it, the touching image of Noli me tangere, with the resurrected Christ saying to the weeping Mary Magdalene in the garden on the first day of the week, "Do not touch me, as I am yet to ascend to the Father." Then further along still is the incredulity of St. Thomas, with doubting Thomas plunging his hand into the wound in the side of the resurrected Christ, and thus believing in the power of the resurrection. Here then are images that reflect the whole Christian message, the death and resurrection of Christ, and images of the apostle, those who first formed the body of Christ in the years after the resurrection, all here painted in natural pigments, tones of red and yellow ochre, most probably sourced from Norfolk's own rich earth. Christ himself had said to his apostles, as recorded in St. John's Gospel, chapter 15, "I am the vine, you are the branches." And across the bottom half of this north wall, below those images of the Passion, the local artist who produced this work has beautifully depicted a vine with grapes. It trails right across the whole expanse of the wall from the west to the east, and even continues onto the jambs of the doorway. Medieval Catholic Christians knew how to be incorporated into the body of Christ with the apostles and to become part of that vine, and it was through the sacraments of the Church, through baptism and above all Holy Communion, the Mass. Medieval churches were sacramental places where people encountered Christ, and the vine here alludes to Christ, the true vine, who gives life to his people and is present with them through the bread and wine of the sacrament, the Mass. It is wonderful on this north wall to be able to get close to this vine trail and see something of the painter's technique. There is a wonderful fluidity to the vine stem itself, all of which has been laid down by eye, the sign of a man who is experienced. The grapes themselves are painted with the end of a squared-off brush dipped in red ochre paint, and on a number of occasions too much paint has been applied to the brush and it has run down the walls. Perhaps the painter's apprentice was responsible for this mundane task of painting hundreds of grapes as his master laid out the vine. It must have been annoying to the painters at the time, but it does nothing to disrupt the general effect of this wonderful work, and it adds a touch of humanity to it, as all slight errors do. On the west wall of the church, the paintings are sadly too damaged to enjoy, but there were images of the Last Judgment of Christ and of the three living and the three dead, a popular memento mori, a reminder of mortality. There is some evidence that there were Old Testament scenes painted on the south wall of the aisle above the main entrance, but these are also too indistinct to appreciate properly. The most rewarding and best preserved paintings of all in the church are to be found in the south aisle, directly above the arches. The work is by the same painter who produced the north wall paintings, and he shows off his great skill and the delicacy of his technique. For the background, he has continued the lovely vine trail that we saw on the north wall, and around the arches he's painted a row of little red triangles, and the pillars were once painted red ochre too. Above each pillar in a triangular space called a spandrel have been painted 4 large decorative roundels, and they depict the symbols of the 4 evangelists, St. Matthew, St. Mark, St. Luke and St. John, the 4 gospel writers, and they each have a scroll with their name on it. The symbols of St. Mark, a lion, and St. Matthew, an angel, are the best preserved. The ox of St. Luke is cut in half as the wall at the east end of the aisle has been rebuilt. The eagle of St. John is less well preserved, but still a work of great beauty. Due to the condition of the work here, we can come to appreciate the great quality of the painting scheme as a whole in the church. The painter was no amateur trying his hand, but was a master of his craft. The quality of the work indicates that the parish of Little Witchingham had to have been fairly vibrant in the early 14th century, for the work would have been very costly. Another indication of the parish's viability at that time is that as much effort has been put into adorning this hidden part of the building in the aisle as the more easily seen north wall. The south wall of the nave on the other side of these arches was found to bear no surviving wall paintings, but Eve Baker concluded that it had been prepared in readiness for the commencement of further painting work there. Which of course begs the question as to why it was never started. There is a possible reason why this work was abandoned. The paintings, based purely on their style, can be close dated to the 1330s or 1340s, more likely the 1340s, and there are no later layers added over them. In 1348 and 1349, the whole of Western Europe, including England, was affected by a deadly pestilence, the bubonic plague, the Black Death. Norfolk, then one of the most populous parts of England, was particularly badly affected, and between 2/5 and a half of the population of the county perished in the Black Death. The Black Death heralded the beginning of the end for many places like Little Witchingham. We have to wonder if the effects of the Black Death can account for the south wall not being commenced. Was there no will or no money to continue it? Perhaps the anonymous painter who so very carefully and with such immediacy rendered the completed scenes was among those who died in 1349. A visit to Little Witchingham is a truly moving experience. These glorious paintings, so very nearly lost, standing in their faded grandeur, are a silent witness to long past events in this sleepy place, and they stand as a lasting memorial to those who, with faith, lived in this place in the distant past. Thanks very much for watching. If you enjoyed this channel, you're bound to enjoy my magazine, The Antiquary. Published every month, it is a labour of love for me, and in it I explore some of the more obscure aspects of our shared history, all beautifully illustrated in full colour. It ships across the world, is offered in print and digital format, and readers give it 5 stars on Google. If you love your history like me, particularly the history of objects, buildings, people and places, why not consider subscribing? Subscribing helps support my work and the channel too. There's a link above and in the video description that takes you to the magazine website.